Welcome back. A while ago in our component selection video, we mentioned there's a new primer manufacturer in town, but not having enough information to form an opinion, we recommended sticking with known top-shelf primers. That manufacturer is White River Energetics, LLC, based in Arkansas, and today we're going to test their primers in our target rifles. We have seen other videos testing their primers for both pistols and rifles, with a huge range of conclusions about them. Everything from, these are awesome, to these are as crappy as Fiocchi. Well, as with everything else we see on the internet, we have to verify for ourselves in rifles we know to be excellent shooters. First order of business, compare the dimensions of White River primers with the CCI primers we've been using. CCI 200 large rifle for our 6.5 Creedmoor, and CCI 250 Magnums for our 300 PRC. For 10 primers in each category, we measured cup diameters, cup heights, and cup base to anvil heights using calipers, and in the case of overall diameter, also a ball micrometer. For the CCI 200 large rifle versus White River, we found the diameters to be exactly the same, 0.211 inch, and the cup heights to be essentially the same, 0.1175 and 0.118 respectively. But the cup base to anvil heights were notably different, 0.126 for CCI and 0.134 for White River, an 0.008 difference. White River anvils stand much taller. For the Magnum large rifle, diameters were again 0.211 inch consistently, but we found differences in cup height and cup base to anvil height. CCI 250 cup height averaged 0.1155, while White River averaged 0.1220, a 6.5 K difference. For cup base to anvil height, CCI 250 averaged 0.127 and White River 0.134, a 7 K difference. What does all this mean? We found that due to the proud anvils in the White River primers, as well as proud cup heights for the Magnum version, we had to use more force than usual to get them to seat deep enough that they weren't extending beyond the bases of our cartridge cases. The result, perhaps combined with a softer cup material, was that our freshly primed cases using White River already showed the flattening we look for as an early sign of overpressure. When doing load development, we routinely look for flattened primers as our first sign that our charge is getting spicy. By the time we see primer cratering, we know it's too hot. Without that early sign of flattening, at least for us, it makes it harder to gauge where our window of give a shit for that charge starts and stops. Also, having to use more seating force gives us pause as to whether we are overcompressing the anvil and damaging the primer. But let's see how they shoot. First, the 6.5 Creed using a Schillen barrel, 10 shots each of our standard tuned load, 43.5 grain of Stayball 6.5 under a 147 grain ELD-M. Seated 20K off the lands. This load usually runs around 2850 feet per second, depending on ambient temperature. Granted, this load is tuned for CCI primers, not White River, but it will give us a good indication of whether to explore White River further. We began with a 3-shot group just to foul the bore, then proceeded to run our test. All let-offs were in the bowl, verified with our trigger cam. The 10 CCI shots produced a 0.83-inch group, average velocity 2812.9, SD 12.7, and ES 40.2. The 10 White River shots came in with a 1.36-inch group, average velocity 2823.4, SD 12.3, and ES 52.8. SD and ES were not tremendously different, but group size and shape were notably better for the CCI run. Second, the 300 PRC, also using a Schillen barrel. 15 shots each of a new load we picked just to burn out some leftover Vitvori N570 powder we had on the shelf. No, this was not a tuned load for either primer, but without sponsors, well, we have to use what we've got. So we picked a charge weight at the higher end of book, 77.4 grain, and seated our 225 grain ELD-Ms to our standard 20K off the lands. Results? The 15 CCI rounds produced a 1.6-inch group with cold bore, 0.95-inch without. Average velocity 2760, SD 18.5, and ES 78. The 15 White River rounds produced a 1.28-inch group with cold bore and 1.25 without. Average velocity 2801.2, SD 15.6, and ES 50.6. SD and ES were actually better for the White River Magnums, but discounting cold bore shots, the CCI group size was notably better. Who knows how much better either primer might have been performing with tuning. Something else we noticed after we got home and began our usual case cleaning routine, without exception, during decapping, all the anvils popped out of the CCI primers, while the White River primers retained theirs. What the heck this means, we have no idea, but it's another data point to consider. Just to clear more leftovers from another prior load development for the 300 PRC, we also gathered Garmin data for 25 rounds using N568 at 80 grains under the 225 grain ELDMs. All 25 were primed with White River Magnums just to get a larger group size. Average velocity 2837.2, SD 11.9, and ES 43.9. Not bad at all for 25 rounds. That's better than we get from this rifle using factory Hornady match ammo. Emphasis factory. We always do better with our hand loads.
Nice.
The group size for the first 10 rounds was 1.54 inch. Not ideal, but again, we didn't tune this load, and we don't have a control group using CCI 250 for this powder. Our conclusions after all this? White River primers performed pretty well in our rifles with SD and ES comparable to CCI, but worse group sizes. We also prefer the feel and look of our CCI primers when seating, and we would miss that early warning sign of primer flattening during load development. CCI didn't used to be our preferred primer, but improvements over the years have turned us into fans. Who knows, the same may happen with White River. One thing's for sure, if primer shortages start up again, we would be comfortable using White River now that we know how they perform, at least in 70 to 80 degree weather.
Nice.
Man, that's shove.
We would need to test them at freezing temperatures in our hunting rifles to have any confidence when taking a kill shot on an animal. If you've tried White River primers in your own guns, please share in the comments. The more we can help each other learn, the better. Please like and follow, and as always, thank you for watching.
You just put a giant dent in the middle. You're halfway from center to edge at 4 o'clock.
Oh, wow, okay. That's the wind out there, huh?
Mm-hmm.